Let's try to settle the debate once and for all. Is it time to give up meat and turn vegan? Much has been made of the benefits of a vegan diet, but how much of that is fact? Well, to answer that, I'm joined by vegan activist Ed Winter, also known as Earthling Ed. He's a prolific public speaker who's been invited to schools, universities and businesses across the world to discuss the issue. While in the meat corner, I have Chris Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA. Ed, I'm going to start with you. Thank you for joining me today. Can you explain to me, you are a vegan activist.
Sure.
So it's not just a lifestyle choice for you, it's something you're very passionate about.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you envisage a world where everyone eventually embraces the vegan approach?
Well, hopefully so. I mean, obviously, I am aware that not everyone in the world is going to be able to make the options and, choose the choices that we have in the UK especially. But my hope is that in the UK, we'll shift towards a plant-based food system for all the merits that a plant-based food system would bring.
Just talk us through it then. So people watching this at home, they might not have heard of what the merits are.
Yeah.
Why is a vegan diet better for you than a meat-based diet?
Well, I mean, veganism is a moral philosophy. So it's about removing or at least eliminating as far as is possible and practicable the exploitation of animals.
Yeah.
So there's a moral obligation to it as well. But of course, it helps the environment, helps the planet, and there's also personal health kind of positives that can come from it as well. But it is about the animals fundamentally.
So, yes, so you're not talking about from a personal point of view, from a selfish point of view. This is more a kind of a global perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's about trying to reduce suffering wherever we possibly can.
And you take it further than just vegetarianism. So, I mean, I haven't seen, but I've read accounts of what goes on in abattoirs, and it does strike me as, to be honest, horrific. And but you would extend that to the use of animal products, for instance, when an animal's died of natural causes or something like that. That would also be...
Well, not necessarily natural causes. Of course, we will want to eat animals who have died of natural causes because of the diseases, but this is more about the human exploitation of animals. So not necessarily an animal who's dead on the side of the road, but the farming of animals and, of course, the abattoirs that we use, even with dairy cows and egg-laying hens, of course, because all of those animals are also killed in the same slaughterhouses in the same way. So it's about that human aspect of the exploitation.
OK, well, let me bring Chris in on this, because I'd be interested to hear the counter-argument to that. Chris, thanks for joining me today. Are you a big carnivore? Are you a big fan of meat?
Yep. Big fan of meat.
And what is there to object to in what Ed is saying? I mean, it seems fair enough to me when he puts it like that.
Well, people make their own moral judgments, don't they? I'm not interested in what other people eat. If people want to be vegans or vegetarians or carnivores, it's of no concern to me whatsoever. I hear the arguments. I make my own mind up. Everyone should be free to make their own mind up. So go for it, whatever you want to do. My only concern about the veganism and vegetarian movement is at some point in the future, it is possible that these people will become a majority. And once you get a majority of people who think that something is ethically unacceptable, then there's a good chance they're going to go out and try and ban it. So I'm all in favour of people being vegans, but I'd rather they remained a minority.
What about what Ed says about the animal rights aspect to this? I mean, to what extent? I mean, you say everyone should have their own right to make their own decisions about what they eat, and that's fair enough. But if we are according to animals their rights as well, don't they have to be taken into consideration to a degree?
No, I don't. I mean, I think animals are essentially there to be killed and eaten. So, I mean, that argument is never going to cut the mustard with me particularly. Obviously, there are lines I wouldn't cross. I've never eaten veal, for example. I've never eaten foie gras. I think there's such a thing as unnecessary cruelty, clearly, and I happily sling people who torture cats and dogs and things in prison for quite a long period of time, not least because it's usually a pretty good precursor to being a serial killer. But I think in the natural world, obviously billions of animals are killed and eaten every day by other animals. I don't see any particular reason why they shouldn't be killed and eaten by humans.
So this is going to be something, Ed, that you will face routinely, is that of course, Chris is arguing from a position of natural law there. We are on the food chain, are we not? There is something natural about eating meat. We have developed that way.
Well, of course, we've eaten meat for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and it's been instrumental in human survival in times of food scarcity. But, the reference to other animals who eat other animals in the wild, well, they do that out of necessity. And the vegan argument is really that we don't have to do what we do to animals anymore, and that's why it becomes a moral issue. Chris said it was about unnecessary cruelty. That's why he didn't eat, veal or foie gras. But of course, we don't have to eat animal products, so it's all unnecessary. And to a dairy cow who's killed for dairy, or to a pig in a gas chamber who's killed for bacon, that suffering to them is just as severe as the suffering to a geese or a duck who's been exploited for foie gras. So when we look at this issue from that of the individual who's suffering, we realise that it's all unnecessary, and that's why it's all immoral.
But doesn't your argument rest on the presupposition that animal life and human life should be seen almost on a par, and that rights are accorded to everyone, whereas Christopher's argument is more that, well, human beings are more important than animals.
Well, we don't have to view non-human animals as being the same as human animals to understand why it's wrong to kill them. We just have to understand that their right to life and their right to their own autonomy transcends the reasons we use to exploit them. So taste pleasure, for example, or convenience. That's what we have to really kind of underpin with this conversation is their right to life and the suffering they endure in farms and slaughterhouses worth more than our sensory pleasure? What has higher value, life or taste, fundamentally?
OK, so Christopher, when you hear that argument, do you think that there is a case here that, I mean, Ed is trying to persuade people of his point of view. Do you think that's ever a view that people will buy into ultimately? Or is it just something too innate about our taste for meat?
Into it. There's more vegans than there ever been before. I think there's probably more vegetarians than there's ever been before. A lot of people get on and get off that particular bandwagon, but you can see how you can see the argument. It's not like I disagree with the argument, really. It's just that's the point of view, and I just don't hold it. And you'll never get me to accept that an animal's life is worth the same as a human's life. And I don't think it's something you can ever prove empirically either way.
What do you make of, I mean, there's obviously been a rise of very militant veganism, with people calling for veganism to be a protected characteristic within the law. Do you think that this is something that you understand in any way?
Well, not really. I mean, I understand there are vegan militants, and I think that's potentially quite a dangerous thing, because once you have a lot of people who think that a chicken's life is worth the same as a human being's, then I suppose they feel morally entitled to go around attacking people who rear chickens or whatever. And you get the similar kind of thing you do, of course, with the anti-abortion crowd, where you have abortion centres being set on fire. And that's why we need to respect each other's views without resorting to extremism, militantism, and violence. But if I may say so, the argument that meat is unnecessary and then therefore we shouldn't consume it, I don't buy into. You hear this a lot from puritanical campaigners, that something is unnecessary. Alcohol is unnecessary. Tobacco is unnecessary. Music, most things are unnecessary. Human beings, one of the things that sets human beings apart from animals actually is that we have a lot of things in life that are luxuries and are unnecessary. We don't need them per se to exist, but they hugely enrich our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a good thing.
Ed, I want to ask you about that specifically. Is that Christopher is making this point that there are all sorts of things that we have that are luxuries.
Sure.
I mean, so that is a persuasive argument, isn't it?
Well, not really, because the things that Chris listed don't have a victim. Our choice of, the music we want to listen to or things like that, there's no victim at the end of it. But when we talk about meat, dairy and eggs, there's a victim at the end of that choice. The animals who are, of course, being exploited and killed, they're the victim. So when we talk about unnecessary action, from a moral perspective, it's about whether or not that action has a victim and that action is unnecessary.
Doesn't alcohol and smoking have a victim ultimately?
But it's your own personal choice in that sense.
But there are people who are affected by your alcoholism, and by your passive smoking,
sure.
This kind of
thing. And
of
course we should definitely be considerate of that. I'm not saying that we should ban smoking or cigarettes. I'm not even saying that we should ban meat, dairy and eggs right now. What I'm saying is that we should have conversations about the morality of these actions to determine whether or not we as individuals, morally speaking, align with that. I mean, Chris himself said that he would be outraged if someone did this to a cat. Maybe the Kurt Zuma case comes to mind. But the real question is, well, why is that wrong, but putting pigs into a gas chamber morally right? So, why, where's that hypocrisy? Where does that come from?
You make a very persuasive case because we're sitting here having this discussion, but I mentioned the sort of more militant approach. Do you worry that when you have more militant voices within this debate, they're actually putting people off your argument?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I don't think that this idea of militant veganism is really representative. I think it's kind of a media talking point that's been blown out of proportion, to be perfectly honest. But I see it as also being something I can play to my advantage, because hopefully by having reasonable, constructive conversations, it shows to people that veganism isn't this extremist ideology. In fact, it's just this kind of extension of the values we already have. Yeah. How often do we hear that Britain is a nation of animal lovers and that we stand against animal suffering and cruelty? Well, I like to believe that's how people genuinely feel. So now all people have to do is recognise that their morality already exists when it comes to animals, that strong morality, and then work out whether or not the unnecessary exploitation, suffering and death of 1 billion land animals, and when it comes to marine animals much more, of course, in this country alone, aligns with that morality, or indeed is actually contradictory to that.
Final word to you, Christopher. I'm assuming you're not persuaded by what you just heard there.
No, I'm not. I remain of the view that animals, for the most part, are there to be killed and eaten. Most of them have a perfectly good life. If you are a sheep raised by a farmer, you'll just be basically standing around in a field eating grass for a period of time, and then one day you'll get a bolt in the back of your head. It's a pretty painless way to go. Everybody dies. Ultimately, I don't consider that to be unnecessary cruelty. In actual fact, I think that a lot of animals get a better death than human beings do, but that's a different question. Maybe
well, human beings don't have their throats cut, obviously.
Well, look, I didn't expect for us to reconcile and reach a sort of agreement at the end of the debate, but I do appreciate you both coming on and sharing your views